Good morning and welcome wherever you are for this special event jointly hosted by the IPI Global Network of Journalists, Editors and Publishers, together with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung through their Africa Media Program. I'm Jacqui Park, Head of Network Strategy and Innovation for IPI. As the network of the world's journalists and editors, the IPI has come out of our virtual World Congress busy, as our tagline said, reimagining journalism with 2020 vision. But what do we mean by that? Well, we mean that 2020 feels like a pivot year for news media. We've paused, coming out of maybe 25 years of disruption. Fine, we're disrupted. What happens now? Well, what will happen is what's already happening. Journalists, editors and publishers are deep into the process of rebuilding the industry for the 21st century. We're doing it with an enduring certainty in the journalistic mission and with an equally enduring lack of certainty of what will work. We keep listening and watching and experimenting and testing our way to, hopefully, the future. And things are still changing as fast as we adapt. But I think we are at least now used to constant change being the new normal for journalism. But one thing we do know, journalism, media, it works best as a network where we support and share and challenge each other, not just in one town or one country, but across continents and around the world. For IPI, that's long meant understanding the need for global solidarity around press freedom and the rights of journalists. Now, we understand too that it means equally centering the big challenges of hurrying on the reset of journalism to meet the needs of now, or pushing back against the revival of populist authoritarianism. And of course, to create new models of work that sustain the independent journalism that we know our communities need. And today, we have three of Africa's big thinkers and doers in journalism. And I'm really excited for this session and pleased to welcome Idris Akinbajo, who's with Nigeria's Premium Times, Gwen Lister, who's now chair of the Namibia Media Trust, and Nigel Mugamu, founder and chief storyteller at Zimbabwe's 263 Chat. And who doesn't want that title? Now, their insights will be moderated by IPI's good friend from the KAS Media Program Sub-Sahara Africa from South Africa, Christoph Plate. And now over to you, Christoph, to take it from here.
Thank you very much, Jacqui, and good afternoon from Johannesburg to all our participants. Media program for the German Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We have just held last week a conference in Ivory Coast near Abidjan with publishers and editors, predominantly from Francophone Africa, that looked at models as to how serious and genuine journalism can be financed, especially in these COVID days. And I think one of the conclusions that was very clear that this, just like the pandemic, this crisis, this media crisis, is not a particularly African crisis, but it is a global crisis. And there are many ways to try and pay serious media on the African continent through a trust, through membership models, through advertising, subscriptions, donors, paywalls, you name it. 2 years ago, we had a similar conference in Accra in Ghana, where, for example, we had a debate about the question whether a paywall works at all in Africa. And the predominant opinion those days in Accra was no, paywalls don't work in Africa. Now, 2 years and the pandemic later, there's more and more media on the continent that considers putting up a paywall or has even already started introducing one. Because the pandemic has swept through newsrooms, hundreds of journalists lost their jobs. But the pandemic has also, on the other hand, shown the need and the demand for serious and verified news. And the audience has changed her attitude. Many people that I know, especially in the middle class in African countries and in the diaspora, realize that media needs money in order to be good, to fight off pressures And for the single journalist to be paid well means financial independence and less temptations. It is my great pleasure this afternoon to discuss questions of financing media on the African continent, to have today on the panel 3 outstanding publishers and editors who all in their own right stand for different financing models. Let me start with Gwen Lister from the Namibia and Windhoek. Gwen, your paper was founded, as far as I know, tried to make itself independent from government advertising, for example. You started a trust model and you seem to be operating with it until today. Please take us a few minutes on this journey as to how you started the paper and how the trust is working.
Thank you very much, Christoph, and thank you, Jacqui, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody who's on this webinar. The model I'm most familiar with, as Christoph has already mentioned, is essentially what I call non-ownership. So setting up the Namibian in 1985, we opted for a trust model, not only because we were donor funded at the time, but also because we did not want to be dictated to by shareholders and or rabid commercial interests. Editorial independence and integrity meant and still means a lot to us, and that is protected by our deed of trust. The newspaper itself operates as a commercial entity, as does our fairly recent acquisition of a printing press. And for the decades since we became sustainable in 1990 or just after, what I call the principle over profit model has worked very well. Overseen by a board of trustees, dividends were poured back into the Namibia Media Trust, which engages in press freedom advocacy work and training with a view to journalistic excellence. The Namibian was the only newspaper in Southern Africa that made the transition from donor dependency to profitability in the early 90s and was the first of its kind ownership model in Africa. With the onset of the digital era, as Christoph has already mentioned, and the age of social media, traditional media the world over were hard hit by advertisers and readers flocking online. But we were no less hard hit than other models when the onset of the COVID pandemic gave us a double whammy at the start of this year. So a realization which had slowly been dawning on us suddenly became a hard reality. We were very print-centered, and what was once a strength had become a weakness. This dramatic downturn led to staff retrenchments and budgetary cutbacks at both the newspaper and the press, and this in turn had a knock-on effect on the NMT Foundation. Currently, the editor of the Namibian is looking at innovative ways and means, including obviously exploring online and other options, to get things back on an even keel. And things seem to be slowly stabilizing, but obviously with a reduced staff and other cutbacks. I would vouch for the trust model as the best ownership model. In fact, the best model to guarantee the future of independent journalism. And the reason is because it's transparent. It plows back profits into improving journalistic standards and promoting advocacy work rather than enriching individual shareholders. While there are currently global initiatives underway to try and help sustain and fund good journalism in whatever form going forward, I still think the best ownership solution is this trust model. This seems inevitable where other trust or business models fail and or where lean and mean approaches haven't worked either, that we need to look at, again, funding. But it's important, I feel, that shareholders don't materially benefit from the assistance of others. And such funding packages, if they happen in the future, must obviously stress the need for editorial independence and quality journalism. Assisting in-house investigative projects may also be another way to go. Still, what may be termed as bailouts come with their own challenges, and these are not really sustainable in the long run. Christoph mentioned in our preliminary chat earlier this week that there are dangers associated with many media houses, for example, taking on interns, as experienced journalists have left or have been retrenched. So they've hit on this more affordable option. But unless these young journalists are mentored every step of the way, there's a strong likelihood that this step, while saving costs, could also lead to a deterioration in journalistic standards. Media entities have and can look at other solutions, such as diversifying into other business opportunities to help sustain the business of journalism. But I think there's always the risk that this may take us away from our core task, which is namely public interest journalism. That having been said, I don't think everything's negative. Some countries have reported an increase in newspaper readership since the start of the pandemic, and the tsunami of disinformation that has people's heads spinning. In knowing what our people want, I think, will help us to find the solutions we may need. And it's going to be a process of adaptation. I'm not the first one to say there's no silver bullet. Cutting and pasting from what appears to work in other countries is not a solution. Rather, I think the way forward is to research the unique habits of our readers, listeners, and viewers in various African countries to find out what they want before we embark on unworkable alternatives, and costly ones probably. And also it's important to understand how news consumption habits are changing, and importantly, how to deliver news via creative, context-specific distribution mechanisms. I do think that months of struggle lie ahead for good media, newspapers in particular, to once again reach break even and hopefully even a profit situation. Changing times also dictate that there be a greater collaboration between media houses, which we didn't used to do before, such as sharing distribution channels and other services. Also, hybrid newsrooms that are focused on innovation, combining research and development alongside the news production processes are most likely to succeed. But I think this experimentation will also come at a cost at a time when most media houses are struggling just to survive. So to conclude, I think it's true to say that it's certainly not business as usual. At the end of the day, there are some business models of media ownership that quite honestly we don't want, neither should we save. Instead, it's good journalism, so essential for democratic well-being, that needs to be preserved and to be guarded at all costs.
Thank you very much for this introductory remarks. Sounds like beautiful music when you talk about decades of sustainability. I mean, that's beautiful that you guys have achieved that. And I know that that is something that many publishers on the African continent and beyond are dreaming about. Let me follow up with one question, because you are independent from donors now, and many media houses on the African continent, they are vying for donors' contributions. What advice, in a general manner, in a generalizing manner, would you give media enterprises that are dealing with donors?
Well, I think first and foremost, Christoph, I would say that obviously whatever funding or donor assistance is given, that it has to absolutely be no strings attached. And as I say, I think the likelihood that donors will fund such newspapers or any other media enterprises for that matter would probably be strengthened if the ownership model is a transparent one. I think obviously where there are shareholders and people making profits and putting it in their own pockets, that donors will be less likely to fund pure commercial propositions. So I'd say first and foremost, if there is assistance, it has to be tied only to good journalism, independent journalism, but should not have any other strings attached. That's very important.
Idris Akinbajo in Abuja, in Nigeria, your publication, the Premium Times, is an online-only publication and the most respected, I should say, in Nigeria. And you finance all this with a diversified model of donor contributions, data mining, membership, trying to tap the diaspora. Tell us a bit more about how you are actually managing to finance the premium times. Idris.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And like you rightly said, we are much younger compared to Gwen's Medium. And Premium Times, Nigeria's leading investigative newspaper, was established in 2011. When it was established, we wanted a newspaper that would help deepen democracy in Nigeria. We were, however, not oblivious of the challenges that we could face, because many of us, the journalists who set up Premium Times, were journalists with a newspaper called Next Newspapers that was rested in 2010, 2011 because of lack of sustainability. So in 2011, when we started Premium Times, we identified 3 major areas that we had to tackle to be a successful newspaper. First was content generation, the second was content distribution, and the third was sustainability. We wanted an accountability media that would focus on exposing corruption, human rights abuses, and regulatory failure in Nigeria and in the larger African continent. In terms of content generation, we knew we had to hire competent and ethical reporters. We knew we had to train our reporters into the kind of journalism that we wanted. In terms of distribution, we reviewed various options. We opted from the start not to use print as a means of distribution, because we looked at the environment we were in and we realized that newspaper circulation was going down drastically in Nigeria and across large part of the world. Newspapers that sold about 100,000 copies daily in Nigeria were selling less than 10,000 as of 2011 when we were starting. And so and Nigeria was also at the time undergoing what you could call a mobile revolution, where millions of citizens were getting access to the internet through their mobile phones. So we looked at all this and we realized what was best for us was to have an online-only newspaper. In order to maximize our reach, we also decided to distribute our content using various social media channels. Twitter, where we have over 1.5 million followers, Facebook, where we have over 1.2 million, WhatsApp, Instagram, and co. So we're going to maximize the use of social media to distribute our content apart from our website. In terms of sustainability, we adapted what Christoph rightly called a mixed model, where we try to raise funds through various streams. The first we did was to set up a non-for-profit arm of Premium Times, which was the Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism. Now, our mixed model, like Christoph rightly said, is a bouquet of various options. We get donor grants, we organize events and partnerships, we make some money from advertising, we make some money from donations, we make some money from book publishing, and we're also into membership platform. Grants at our initial stage and up until now helped us a lot to find our feet while we expanded into areas of sustainability. Some of our early grantors include the Open Society, MacArthur Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the rest of them. Some of the grants were tailored towards specific areas of reporting, such as health reporting, agric reporting, election reporting, and so on, while others were essentially to just help sustain our newsroom operations as we expanded in Nigeria. In terms of events, raising money from events, we organize annual events for the dual purpose of raising funds and also contributing to the political and social discourse in critical areas in Nigeria. For example, we organize what we call the annual health dialogue, where we bring together policymakers, health industry experts, politicians who are interested in the health sector. The annual health dialogue is arguably the largest and most influential in that sector in Nigeria. We also have the agri dialogue that is not as large as the health dialogue. We have training programs. Many of these events have slowed down this year, essentially because of COVID-19 and because a lot of events are now being organized online. Advertising, even though because of the experience of we, the journalists that started Premium Times, we knew that advertising was the most intrusive funding source that could affect independent journalism. We also realized that to operate a successful mixed model where sustainability was constantly being challenged, we had to tap the little funding we could get from advertising. And for the past few years, our advertising revenue has increased gradually in relation to our overall revenue, up until this year when the COVID-19 happened and businesses themselves had problems surviving. And so that definitely affected our advertising revenue. But before then, the last few years, it had grown, not as much as the others, but they are growing gradually up until early this year. In terms of donations, we set up a donations platform where people from anywhere in the world could simply donate to our operations. Now, we have a membership model majorly targeting Nigerians in diaspora, but with a focus on Nigerians in the US, UK, and South Africa. We've already organized focus group discussions in these countries to engage diaspora, Nigerians in diaspora about becoming members and sustaining and helping to sustain the kind of credible media that we're trying to run here in Nigeria. Our target from the membership program is to raise about 1 billion Nigerian naira annually, which we believe will be essentially enough to sustain the independent reporting that we are trying to do in Nigeria. We also engage in book publishing. We have an arm called Premium Times Books, where we partner with respected authors, including Nigerian academics in the diaspora, as well as prominent activists in Nigeria, to co-publish books and ensure adequate distribution. We have so far published 4 successful books written by Nigerian academics in the US and the UK, and two others are in the press as we speak. We also engage in partnership. We engage in partnership with like-minded organizations. For example, one of our most recent partnerships is with VOTAC, a Silicon Valley-based organization that is seeking to enter Africa with focus on stock exchange reporting and streaming for children. We will be working with VOTAC to build collaborative content across 29 stock exchanges in Africa, with Premium Times providing the Nigerian content. What we hope to benefit from this as Premium Times will be training on multimedia for our staff, international advertising opportunities that VOTAC platform gives us, increase in revenue, increase in our eyeballs, and a much wider reach in terms of content availability. So we are essentially, like Christoph mentioned, putting together all these systems, trying them continuously, because we realize that the sustainability landscape is gradually changing, evolving, and it's not static. So we realize one model may not help us, and unless we combine a lot of this and continue to experiment, we may suffer challenges that we did not expect. And so these are some of the areas that we are trying to use to sustain our operations. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Idris. This very interesting and colorful bouquet of sources of income that you are having, doesn't that require a whole big number of people to administer all this? Because you cited like of incomes big, others are small. The administrative input must be considerable.
Yes, it's we have a whole business development team that handles a lot of it. It's not very large. The team is not very large. I think it's a team of about 5 to 6 permanent staff. Yes, about 5 staff, and they continually try to look at the various options available for us and try to expand in necessary areas. So you are right, it requires personnel that will be focused on that, separate from the editorial operations, which we totally separate our operations from the business side from. But it's also an area that, like I said, because we call many of us who started Premium Times in 2011, we are journalists in a newspaper that was rested because it could not sustain itself. We learned that media houses must pay as much attention to sustainability as they pay to content, because of what use the content that cannot sustain and survive its own operations. So we are, just as we are growing editorially and making sure that our editorial content is premium within Nigeria and to the larger African audience, we are also having a sufficient business development team that focuses on all these areas I've mentioned.
Now, if in Nigeria or in Namibia or here in South Africa, we are complaining about the economic challenges of publishing and of survival, we haven't talked about Zimbabwe yet, because our situation in Nigeria, Namibia, and South Africa is still relatively okay, when we compare to the economic challenges of publishing and of survival in Zimbabwe. And that's where I welcome Nigel Mugamu. He is the founder and CEO of 263 Chat, the Zimbabwean online publication, and has been operating with also a mix, Nige, of advertising revenue and membership contributions. Tell us more about that, please.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, so, I was actually just going to launch into a little bit of a description of where we started, but to give you context, and I'm glad you touched on the economy. The national budget was announced, today's Tuesday, on Thursday last week. And the finance minister said, I hope to get the inflation rate to 135% by the end of next year. Okay, so that's the context that that's really where we're starting from. So it's obviously it's a triple digit inflation and digit that we're dealing with right now. Prices of goods are obviously going up, and so how do you operate a business in that environment? 263 Chats. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. These bloody kids come with all kinds of germs from school. So I'm the last one to get the cold. But I'll try and speak as loud as I can. 263 Chat started. I started 263 Chat 8 years ago now. We celebrated our 8th anniversary in September, and and I'm not even a journalist by training. I'm an accountant by profession. So I'm a numbers guy. I've just got another business. I've got an MBA, another business degree, and that is what really helps to run the business. Obviously, alongside the team that I have, we're about 15 of us in the team, and obviously this year has been a very, very difficult year. We've had some of our journalists arrested, some of our journalists assaulted. Of course, we're obviously in a global pandemic, which is COVID. What the government has sought to do here in Zimbabwe is to clamp down even more on citizens' rights. So, things have been tougher than usual, along with the economic challenges, right? So you're trying to get content out. You're trying to, and obviously our day job really is to educate and inform the public about what's happening. The reason why I started 263 Chat in 2012, I had the idea that I wanted a publication that was neutral and credible, balanced. We live here in Zimbabwe in a highly polarized, highly politicized environment. So state media is obviously on the other side, print, the traditional media is obviously on the other side. And, so you got these two opposing groups, and we literally planted ourselves in the middle. We didn't start off as a publication. We started off as a Twitter account and literally as a discussion platform. And so that led to our first revenue line, so we started managing people's social media. We no longer do that now, but that's how we started. Then we got involved in, we're having all these events online, all these discussions online, and we started generating revenue from hosting events. So taking the online conversation and bringing it offline. So we started doing that. And eventually, along the way, we obviously started publishing the news, and we've got a host of different advertising areas where obviously you can advertise on our website, on social media. About 3 years ago, we started what we call the e-paper, so the electronic paper. And essentially what we were trying to do was, we read a little study in 2016, so I'm obviously still a numbers guy. The regulator, the telecoms regulator in this country, publishes a report every quarter. I pay a lot of attention to that report. It basically gives you numbers and tells you all kinds of things, telephone company X has, X number of subscribers, and, this is how much data is being used. And this particular report in late 2016 suggested that Zimbabwe had a comparably high number of internet users, right? and that a lot of the internet users would use WhatsApp. So they had WhatsApp, and to them, that was the internet. So our job as a publication was, how do we get into their lives? How do we interact with them on this platform that they use? And obviously at the time, if everyone remembers, Donald Trump was also became the president of the US, and he was talking a lot about fake news, and and it seemed like fake news was something that was rather new. But I mean, it's obviously, we know that fake news has been there for many years. And so what we were trying to do at the same time was to counter the proliferation of fake news. And so we came up with a newspaper, an e-paper, an electronic paper that reads like a newspaper, fit for WhatsApp. So it's about 2 or 3 megabytes each edition. And we've been doing this now for 3 years. So November is actually just gone by, is our 3rd year. We're just under 600 editions, and it's proving to be very, very popular. It's one of the ways we found, a way of reaching the masses, or reaching more people that don't necessarily have the full internet. Now we're toying around with SMS and trying to see how you can distribute news on SMS, because sometimes it's very easy. We find it very easy to assume, yeah, everyone's online, and then everyone's got access to a website, to our website. Everyone's got access to our e-paper, but we often forget that there's a large population that still have a dumb phone, or even have a smartphone but just don't have data. So how do we reach those people? We know that in this country, we're not going to necessarily get, I mean, they just, this last month, they awarded, so we're in a country of about 14 million people. We've had one TV station since independence, and government awarded 6 new TV licenses to 6 players just last month. One of the, and I laugh when I say this, one of the players who has been granted this TV license is a company that's linked to the army. So are they going to necessarily give a company like 263 Chat a TV license, even if we had applied? I don't think so. So, we're living in that, like I said, a highly polarized environment, and we've got to use the tools that we have at our disposal. And that's really, the sort of the DNA that we have at 263 Chat. Our team is young. Always try to have a lot of young. I'm the oldest in the team, and we have a lot of young people because they've got new ideas. It's simply, here's a cell phone. What can we do? How do we report the news using this cell phone? How do we get the story out? How do we record a video? How do we record the audio? How do we send it out? And obviously we've created all kinds of communities on social media, whether it's our Twitter account or our Facebook, or even just on WhatsApp. We've got hundreds and hundreds of WhatsApp groups for different things, and our subscription. And obviously we send our e-paper via WhatsApp only, and currently we're sending it out daily, Monday to Friday, to just under 44,000 subscribers who receive that for free. We don't believe in a paywall. We believe in trying to figure out how to get the advertiser to pay for this. The SMS is, platform that we're working on. Is something that we're toying around. At some point, the subscriber would have to pay, but we're trying to see how we can get the donor community involved in paying for that, so that at least the subscriber receives the information and the news that they need. I think I'll just stop there, and obviously, wait for the questions that will that may come my way.
Yes, thanks, Nigel. And the first question comes from me. I mean, the Zimbabwean society is, of course, a society where, due to the dire economic circumstances, people very often have different economic priorities than paying for media and paying for being informed. Do you witness a change in people's approach towards media like 263 Chat, especially now after or during the pandemic? where people start appreciating more and more often verified news. They turn to websites and publications that they can trust in. And does that open their wallets?
Yeah, that you know. So we, Stilly, who you know from Daily Maverick, introduced me to a term, and I think you're sort of touching on this, reader revenue. You know, and we haven't cracked it yet. We haven't cracked the reader revenue. How do you get a revenue from readers? It's so to answer your question though. Yes, in a time of crises, people rely on 263 chat more than they normally do. Obviously, this year, you know, we're still in this crisis, and people generally want to know what's going on with the government. What are the government regulations? You know, with COVID, I mean, is the lockdown level, have the lockdown restrictions been lifted? And of course, they rely on us a lot more. So we've seen a growth in our numbers, you know, people accessing our website, people subscribing to our e-paper, people interacting with us on social media. We've seen a growth in that. We've also seen a growth in inquiries, business inquiries, because for those who did print, you know, it became very difficult to sell physical copy. And so the term e-paper, electronic paper, e-paper is something that we coined here in Zimbabwe. And now all the publications have a version of the e-paper, right? And they've realized that, you know, we've obviously been doing this for 3 years. They were hesitant initially. They've had to, you know, jump on board and also create their own versions of the e-paper. They are trying to sell the e-paper. I find that really difficult to actually manage. How do you PDF that can be shared very easily? It's very difficult to monetize. You know, if you're trying to sell it at least. So yeah, there definitely has been an increase in the need for more information and more credible information over this COVID, this pandemic that we're experiencing right now.
I want to turn to Idris again. Idris, there has been in Nigeria, I think never ever since the Premium Times started, a situation where the Premium Times was very liked by government and by the authorities because you are exposing corruption, you are exposing scandals, you are asking those questions that the powers that be don't really like to hear. Yet I wanted to ask you, do you realize an appreciation of the role of the media, especially during the pandemic, as we have witnessed in quite a few other countries, where all of a sudden government that always disliked whatever was said and written and aired, all of a sudden realizes that the fourth estate, the media, serves a purpose in their respective societies?
I wouldn't say the Nigerian government has begun to respect the media more during the COVID-19 pandemic or its relevance. I wouldn't say so, but I would say the citizens, the Nigerian citizens, definitely have appreciated or at least have read more of the credible media during the pandemic to get information about the COVID-19. For the first few months of the COVID experience, for example, our readership shot up a lot compared to the previous months before Nigeria had its first COVID case in February. So in terms of readership, definitely the COVID reportage of the COVID-19 and critical and adequate reporting of it, including the funding and misuse of funds by government agencies under the guise of COVID, helped increase the readership for us. But in terms of government appreciation of the role of the media in doing that, I wouldn't say the Nigerian government is really maximizing that.
Thanks, Idris. There's a question for Gwen, whom you have already answered the question, Gwen, in the chat. However, I would like to repeat it. It's a question by Wangeci Mwangi from Kenya, whether the Namibian ever had to turn away an offer or a financial grant, a donation, because there were strings attached. Gwen.
Yeah, sorry, I just was just typing the answer to the question. But basically, you know, the funding for the Namibian was in the pre-independence period, and all of the funding that we received had no strings attached. If it could be called a string, then the issue was independent journalism, which we practiced in any case. So no, we never had to turn away any offers of funding that had strings attached.
There is another question to Nigel Mugamu by Pooja Pandey saying, what so far has been the most promising line of sustainability for 263 Chat? Nigel.
So one of the things that I didn't actually mention, but just totally slipped my mind. So we offer a host of multimedia services. So for example, live streaming, I don't know, it could be a press conference or, you know, something like that. So what we've noticed is the multimedia side of things. So people have this interest in, there's a live event on Facebook. I want to know what it's about, you know? So they'll watch the first 2-3 minutes, even if it's something that they're not necessarily interested in initially, right? So we noticed that, you know, the multimedia side of things has really, really grown. And that's a very, very important part of our revenue. But it does come with cost. You know, these cameras aren't cheap. They aren't made in Zimbabwe. You got to buy them in, you know, for us, the easiest place to buy them is South Africa. You do need foreign currency for that to happen. So yeah, it's, you know, you got to overcome a lot of these other challenges just to get this brand new camera from, from your supplier in South Africa. So yeah, you know, there's a host of challenges, but yeah, the multimedia side of things has proven to be very effective. We also see there's also been a really good growth in the e-paper advertising. That's also come up a lot this year, especially because you know, people are because of COVID and everything that's been happening this year.
Can I just add a question by Saskia Niehoff to Idris and Nigel, whether you agree with Gwen's recommendation of the importance of audience research, collaboration, and hybrid newsrooms, and whether, and let's start with Idris, whether you have any plans to prioritize such developments in the future.
Definitely we do, and are already doing that. Before we started our membership model, we actually had to carry out an audience research to find out if millions of our readers will be willing to be members, or they'll just prefer donations, and what to essentially review all our operations from the point of view of our readers. What do our readers think of our operation, and what percentage of them will be willing to contribute to it? What percentage of them will be willing to do so regularly, and the rest? So we do a lot of audience research, and definitely I agree with Gwen on that. Same on collaboration. Here in Nigeria, we currently collaborate with many other newsrooms on a platform we call the Leaks NG, because we realize one, that we are accountable, that are willing to do accountability media in Nigeria. We all want to achieve the same purpose. So there is no basis for which we will not collaborate, share resources, share content, agree on dates of publication together. And I think that's the future of journalism. The era when journalism was competing amongst itself is gradually getting over. There must be willing and deliberate moves to collaborate within newsrooms and across newsrooms. And we are already doing that. So I definitely agree with Gwen on it.
Yeah. I retweet everything you just said. I think you know, collaboration is the way to go. I think for us here in Zimbabwe, you always, you know, because obviously we're a smaller outfit, we're always looking to you know, and we're competing with the bigger publications who have bigger budgets. You know, if I give an example, state media, they've got print, they're online, they've got radio, they've got TV. You know, we can't compete with that. And of course, they've, you know, it's a listed company too. So we, you know, how do we compete with that? So it's important to, I always like to say, we need to hold hands with the other independent publications, you know, share ideas, you know, even share, you know, story. Look, hey guys, we're all going to this press conference. Let's all go, you know, and especially if it's, we know when, you know, if it's like an opposition press conference or we're attending or whatever we're doing together, you kind of risk all of us. You know what I mean? There's also safety in numbers. That's something that we also think about as well as, journalists. Oh, guys, they're cracking down on this right now, or stay away from this particular area. There's already things that we're doing as a community, as a media, sector. I think, in some cases we need to formalize those things. I think we, one of the things I'd love to see more is, us guys here in Zimbabwe holding hands with publications in Nigeria or Namibia or, Zambia or whatever. I think that's also very, very important, because we are, after all, telling the African story. And I think that story needs to be told, especially by us as well.
Because one of the conclusions, if I may add, Nigel, of the conference that we just had last week in Ivory Coast is that a lot of regional cooperation, which was always dreamt about and talked about in previous years, is now technically possible, because it's so easy to exchange and to collaborate between newsrooms in East Africa. So we are creating a Kenyan-Nigerian cooperation. There might be an Ivorian partnership with South Africa, and so on and so forth. And I think that really, really increases also the audience and increases the scope of topics that are being selected and the quality of these particular publications. There's one question by Henri Pierre Kubaka, who's saying, and this is a question to all of you, and I would all three of you ask you to give a very brief answer of just one sentence. What do you do if you realize that one of your big clients, one of your big advertisers is being involved in some kind of funny business? Gwen.
I'm not running the newspaper at the moment, but certainly when I was, any kind of weird and wonderful advertising requests, especially those that interfered in any way with editorial integrity, would have been turned down. I do recall once having, I think it was our local power parastatal, which wanted a black wrap around all the newspapers. And in fact, they'd been to all the other newspapers and everybody had agreed they're going to do it. It was a lot of money. And when they came to me, I turned it down and I said, there's no ways that I would allow something like that to interfere with the reader's choice of whether they buy a newspaper or not, dependent on what the front page looks like. So I turned down a very lucrative contract because, as I say, that would have gone against our editorial integrity by hiding basically the front page. So certainly we've always had a very strict guidelines in place when it comes to advertisers advertise, but they can't interfere in editorial. But at the same time, we don't necessarily know those who do advertise and pay their money, what they or who they may be in league with. So that may not always be possible to establish beforehand.
Thanks, Gwen. Over to you, Idris.
The editorial department is totally separate from the business department. And so whenever we get a story lead, whether about our advertiser, major advertiser, major contributor, it does not affect our editorial operations in any way. We just go ahead with the lead, we investigate, and we publish our story. We have lost dozens of advertisers because of that, who feel annoyed that we are publishing stories critical of them, and we don't ever let whoever is advertising with us affect our editorial judgment. So we just go ahead with our independent reporting. If you still like to advertise with us, good for you. If you want to pull out your advertisements, good for you. But we just go ahead with our reporting whenever we get leads, and then we do our own investigations and do our story independently.
Nigel, is that also possible for a Zimbabwean enterprise, a limited number of advertisers who actually do have the budget?
Yeah, it is definitely with you guys. It definitely is possible. I mean, we do it. I own the business, but I'm not involved in the editorial. I don't decide what is being published. In fact, when I go and pitch to a new client, I always tell them, that's one of the first things I mention. I don't have anything to do with editorial. If you guys are caught with your pants down and you're doing something wrong, you're on your own. And it's something you've got to say from the very, very beginning. And otherwise, you risk the credibility of your whole entire operation. And so you lose the audience, you lose the customer. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation, I think.
May I ask something, Christoph? Does Nigel as the owner, guarantees the editorial integrity of the editorial newsroom, which I think is very important, Nigel.
I do. I mean, so as we're talking, I mean, I have no idea what's being published. In fact, we're actually creating a board, editorial board, just to create some more distance between myself and editorial. I don't interfere. I stopped. I don't get involved in editorial anymore. I think there was a time, 2016 was probably the last time. But right now, whatever they publish, they'll publish whatever they publish. We get it wrong, and I'm the one who normally apologizes. So, it's that you got to lead and you got to apologize if you get it wrong, because sometimes we do. But in terms of what content is pushed out, that's not on me.
There's a very interesting question to Gwen by Yaya Balde, where it's been asked, Gwen, what's your standpoint on a government trying to bail out media that gets into troubled waters? I mean, I know that, for example, in a place like Kenya, there have been discussed maybe a tax holiday for some media houses, but elsewhere there have also been discussions, like in Ivory Coast, to what extent the Ivorian government should help those endangered media enterprises. Given your experience, Gwen, what's your response?
Yeah, it's a very controversial issue, Christoph, and my position is fairly clear. I've always been very opposed to government ownership of media, which in most African countries we know is a reality. They usually run a television and radio. At once upon a time, it was exclusively government, and they usually have their own newspaper. And I was totally opposed to, and still am, taxpayers' money being used by government in an area they have no business, essentially. So would I then say, yes, it's great. Why doesn't the government bail out newspapers that are in trouble? In our African context, I'm afraid, a move like that would be grossly misunderstood. And I think at the end of the day, government would expect a pound of flesh in return for assisting independent press. Their role, as far as I'm concerned, is to provide an enabling environment in which media can thrive and survive. But that's where it stops. We are not afraid at the level where we could look at the Swedish model or the Nordic countries where that in fact happens and the taxpayer does help media. I think it would lead to far too many misunderstandings and probably lead to the demise of independent media if that actually happened.
Very grateful to all three of you that you have joined us in this discussion today. Of course, we couldn't touch on all the issues. We did not elaborate extensively on the need to diversify for many media houses, because these are special challenges to diversify also the different products without losing the identity of the brand name or the identity of the brand. But that's maybe for another discussion. And I'm also apologizing to the audience all over that we were not able to respond to all the questions, but I think there's always an opportunity to get in touch with our panelists and ask questions, in particular Nigel Mugamu, about his e-paper and other things that Nigel, I'm sure, will happily answer. One thing is clear, that there's no one-size-fits-all model. Gwen has said it in the beginning, you cannot just copy and paste. And I think that applies to many different financing aspects that we have been discussing here. What works in the one country, because the government doesn't interfere, might not necessarily work in the other, because the government and the tax authorities do interfere. But there is an urgent need to also diversify the sources of income and to draw from differences, not to make off dependent just on one of them. And there's a need, I think, to constantly think of new possible products to be grouped around the cash cow or the one publication that creates the brand name. Good and serious journalism, I'm sure, will prevail on the African continent. There's no doubt about that. But there's certainly a need for greater flexibility and certainly for growing awareness amongst those who consume media that media needs to be financed. I would like, as the director of CAS Media Africa, to thank you all for your participation. And I'm now handing over to Jacqui Park from IPI to say the final bye-byes. Thanks very much from Johannesburg.
Okay, thanks so much, Christoph. That was really wonderful conversation and wrapping up. And thanks very much, Idris, Gwen and Nigel. I mean, really fascinating models and so different, and just incredible to see the kind of different revenue strategies that you're all putting together. From IPI, that's it. So thank you very much for joining us. Please keep an eye on the newsletter. If you're not already signed up, then please do. And look out for more events like this. IPI is very focused on ensuring the sustainability of journalism into the future. And so we're very keen to explore the many different models and experiments that we're all trying around the world and sharing those, because that's really how I think we'll all get ahead. So once again, thanks again from IPI, and good night from me. Good day to all of you.